The Alien Bride. The sky above was purple, and the two moons of planet Solera shone bright. A giant silver tower stood in the middle of the city, glowing under the stars. Inside, hundreds of alien guests had gathered. They were silent, watching the main event with serious eyes. At the front of the hall, Jera stood tall. Her skin was a smooth mix of dark blue and silver. Her eyes were sharp, glowing like ice. She wore armor made of crystal, and a long blade rested on her back. She was beautiful, but she was also deadly. Beside her stood a human man, Eli Grant. He looked calm, too calm. His hair was messy, his black suit neat, but not perfect. His smile was soft. Some guests whispered, surprised he wasn't scared. He should have been terrified, because this was not a normal wedding. In Jera's species, the bride always kills the groom after the ceremony. It was a sacred tradition, an act of power, of honor. They believed a warrior could only gain strength by taking her partner's life. Humans had made peace with the Exolarans only 1 year ago. This marriage was part of a strange treaty. Earth would offer one man for bonding, Eli. He would be married, and then eaten. No one expected him to live. As the high priest spoke, Jera stared at Eli. Her heart beat fast, not with love, but with hunger. Her fingers twitched, ready to strike. But Eli just smiled. "You're not afraid," she whispered, leaning close. Eli looked into her glowing eyes. "Should I be?" Jera blinked. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not without fear. Not with kindness. Was he foolish or brave? She couldn't tell. The high priest raised a golden staff. "The final vow," he said. Jera placed her hand on Eli's chest. One sharp nail poked his skin. Just one strike, and it would be over. The whole room held its breath. But before she could speak, Eli leaned forward and whispered something in her ear. Her eyes widened. She stepped back, her hand trembling. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice shaking. Eli said nothing. He just smiled again, calm like a still lake. The guests looked confused. The high priest frowned. "Why do you wait, warrior?" Jera didn't answer. Her heart was confused. Her instincts told her to kill him now, to follow tradition, to become stronger. But something inside her said no. What had he whispered? Something no male had ever dared say. She looked at him again. This man had crossed light years, knew the risk, still came, and still smiled at her like she was more than just a weapon. Later that night, after the guests left, Jera stood alone on a balcony. The city below was quiet, but her mind was not. She thought about his whisper, about the soft way he looked at her, about how he didn't flinch when she almost struck him. Then her sister walked in. "You didn't do it," she said, crossing her arms. "Why?" I don't know," Jera replied. Her sister laughed. "You're growing weak." Jera turned sharply. "No, I'm just thinking. Her sister stepped closer. "We are warriors. We don't think. We strike. You know the rules." Jera looked back at the stars. He knew I would kill him. And still he smiled. He whispered something kind. Her sister scoffed. "Kindness is a trick. Tomorrow, finish it, or the elders will do it for you." Jera said nothing. But deep down, something had changed. This human, Eli, had done the unthinkable. He had stepped into the jaws of death and made the beast hesitate. What was his plan? What did he know? And why did he come here with no weapons, no fear, just trust? That night, Jera couldn't sleep. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a killer. She felt human. And that thought scared her more than anything. The whisper. Jera walked through the palace hallway in silence. Her footsteps echoed off the crystal walls. Her sharp claws were hidden, but her thoughts were anything but calm. Last night, She was supposed to kill her human groom. She didn't. Instead, she froze. Because of a single whisper. Eli's words still played in her mind like a broken record. I didn't come here to die, Jera. I came to save you. She didn't understand it. Save her. From what? She was a warrior. A future general. A living blade. But now, her heart felt strange. Uneasy. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, in the guest wing, Eli sat cross-legged on the floor. He wasn't wearing armor, not even a weapon, just a simple black shirt and pants. He stared at a glowing orb in his hand, a message from Earth. It was short. Eli, if you're seeing this, you made it to the wedding. That's good. But remember, Jera is not your enemy. She's a prisoner of her own kind, same as the last 5 men before you. You are humanity's last try. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Eli turned off the message. He took a deep breath. He knew what he was doing, but that didn't make it easier. He was sent not to fight, not to run, but to change the mind of someone who had been raised to believe love ends in death. That someone was Jera. Back in her private chamber, Jera faced her mirror. She looked at herself, not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as a person. Her hand moved slowly to the side of her head. She removed a small silver band. It deactivated the mental training chip placed in her brain since childhood. Instantly, her mind buzzed with noise, confusion, fear, emotion, all the things the chip had kept away. She fell to her knees. Was this what it felt like? To feel. She remembered something else Eli had said after the wedding, when the guards weren't listening. You think you were born to kill, but I think you were born to choose. No one had ever said that to her, not even her parents. Later that day, Jera found Eli in the palace garden. He was feeding a strange bird-like creature with glowing feathers. It made little clicks and chirps as it pecked at his hand. Jera watched him from a distance, arms crossed. You're not like the others, she said quietly. Eli looked up, smiling. The others screamed, didn't they? She nodded. Some begged. One tried to fight. One cried. And you still killed them. She didn't answer. Her silence said enough. Eli stood and wiped his hands. But not me. Jera frowned. I don't know why. Eli walked closer, until he was just a few steps from her. Maybe you do. You just don't want to admit it. Her eyes narrowed. Say what you mean. I think, he said softly, you don't want to be a monster anymore. Her body tensed. No one called a Xalaran warrior a monster. Not, and lived. But Eli didn't flinch. He just stood there, waiting. I don't have a choice, she said after a long pause. Our law says I must finish the bonding. That means your death. Eli tilted his head. What if you broke the law? She laughed. You don't understand. My people believe pain is love. That power is the only thing that matters. If I let you live, they'll think I'm weak. They'll kill both of us. Eli shrugged. Then we better come up with a new plan. That night, in a hidden chamber deep below the palace, Jera met with her old friend and trainer, Salin, a retired warrior with one eye and a heart full of scars. You came for answers, Salin said. Jera nodded. What happens to a warrior who spares her mate? Salin looked down. Exile. Dishonor. Death. If you're lucky. Jera clenched her fists. There has to be another way. There is, Salin whispered, but it has never worked. Jera leaned in. Tell me. Salin pointed to the ancient wall behind him. Carved into it was a story, a forbidden legend. A Xalaran princess once loved a male from another world. She refused to eat him. Instead, they fled. They tried to teach peace, but they were hunted and silenced. Why are you showing me this? Jera asked. Salin met her eyes. Because I see the same fire in you. Jera didn't know what to say. Her heart ached with something unfamiliar. Was it hope? The next morning, the royal court sent a message. Complete the bonding at sunset. If not, the elders will handle it. Jera's time was running out. She went to Eli's room. He was reading an old book. When he saw her face, he stood up quickly. What is it? They gave me until sunset. Eli nodded slowly. Then we have 1 day left to do something impossible. Which is? Make you the first of your kind, to choose love over fear. As the twin suns began to set, Jera stood again in her ceremonial armor. Her people watched from below. The high priest raised his staff once more. But this time, Jera did something no one expected. She turned to the crowd and said, I will not complete the bonding. Gasps, shouts, weapons drawn. I do not kill what I loved, she continued, and I do not fear what I do not understand. The elders rose in anger. Then Eli stepped forward, holding up a small silver device. I brought something, he said, a message from Earth. He activated it. Suddenly, holograms filled the air, human weddings, babies laughing, people hugging, smiling, crying, not out of fear, but love. The aliens stared in shock. This is what we lived for, Eli said, not to kill, but to build. Jera held her breath. This moment would decide everything. The forbidden feeling. The council chamber was in chaos. Elders shouted. Guards reached for weapons. The high priest looked like he had swallowed fire. Never in their history had a warrior bride refused the final vow, especially not in front of the sacred assembly. But Jera stood tall beside Eli, unmoving. She had just broken the most ancient rule of her species. She had spared her partner. And worse, she had done it with love in her eyes. The silence was cut by a cold voice. Elder Varn, the oldest and most feared among them. You've chosen dishonor, he growled. You've chosen weakness. Jera replied firmly, No, I've chosen something stronger. Eli didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a challenge to their traditions. Then Elder Varn pointed at Eli. Take him away. If the female cannot finish the bonding, the court will do it instead. Guards moved forward, weapons in hand. Jera's body reacted instantly. She stepped in front of Eli, her claws out, her energy flaring like a sun ready to explode. Touch him, she warned, and I will show you how weak I am. The guards froze. Even the elders hesitated. Jera wasn't just any warrior. She was a rising legend. The daughter of the warlord Rajtur, the only female to defeat 3 champions in a single trial. Killing her would bring shame and possibly war. So they paused. And in that pause, hope grew. Later that evening, Jera and Eli were placed under house watch. Not in chains, but closely guarded. The court didn't know what to do with them. They had committed no crime by law, but they had shattered tradition. Jera sat near her window, looking out at the twin moons. Eli was behind her, quietly making tea with herbs he had collected in the gardens. Finally, she broke the silence. I feel something I don't have a word for. Eli handed her a warm cup. Try to describe it. She stared into the cup. Steam rose like ghostly ribbons. It burns in my chest. It makes me protect you without thinking. I dream of you dying, and I wake up with pain. But I've never felt pain before. That's fear, Eli said softly. Fear of losing someone. Jera looked at him. Is that what humans feel all the time? He smiled. When we love? Yes. She blinked. Then it is a beautiful kind of pain. They sipped tea in silence. For a moment, 2 worlds forgot the war that had once divided them. Across the city, Elder Varn met with a dark figure, General Morth, commander of the royal forces. She is too dangerous now, Varn said. She's planting ideas in the minds of the young. Soon, others may choose not to kill. Morth nodded. What do you want me to do? If she doesn't finish the bonding in 2 nights, eliminate them both. quietly. Understood. Back in the royal guest quarters, Jera watched Eli teach alien children how to build a kite. They laughed. They ran. They played like young humans. Their parents watched from afar, curious, confused, but not angry. One child, a small girl with silver scales and bright red eyes, ran to Jera and pulled her hand. "Will the human die?" the girl asked. Jera knelt down slowly. "No. Why not?" Jera looked over at Eli, who was flying the kite high above the garden. "Because he taught me how to feel," she said. That night, Jera couldn't sleep. She went outside and stood by a glowing pond. The night air was cool. Eli walked out after her. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "I don't know how to live with this feeling, this connection." He stepped beside her. "You don't have to figure it out now." She turned to him. "But the others, my people, they'll never accept us." Eli looked up at the stars. "Maybe not today, but someone has to be first. Someone has to break the cycle." She paused. "Do you trust me?" she asked. "With everything," he replied. Jera touched his chest gently, right where his heart beat. It was fast. But not from fear, from something else. That was when she realized. She wasn't protecting him because she had to. She was protecting him because she wanted to. She loved him. And that was forbidden. The next morning, a notice was posted across the palace. The bonding ritual must be completed by the second sunset, or both will be declared traitors to the crown. The countdown had begun. Jera met with Eli in the strategy chamber. "We have 2 days," she said. "We need allies." Eli nodded. "I've seen the way the children look at you. You've already planted the seed." They began to plan, not for war, but for a peaceful rebellion. They would speak to the young, share human ideas, love, choice, peace without death. They would use stories, not weapons. It was risky, but so was love. As they trained together that afternoon in the combat hall, under the eyes of the guards, Jera asked Eli a question. "If I had killed you that day, would you have hated me?" Eli thought for a moment. "No, because I came here knowing the truth, and I still chose you." Jera stopped moving. Her heart skipped. "You knew I would kill you, and still came." "I came," Eli said, "not to survive, but to change you." Jera's eyes filled with something wet. Tears. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "I don't even know what these are." "Feelings," Eli said gently. "They're how you know you're alive." Elsewhere, in the barracks, General Morth readied a silent team. "Tomorrow night," he ordered. "End this. The girl, the human, quiet and fast." One soldier raised his hand. "But what if she fights back?" Morth gave a chilling smile. "Then we kill her too, and say she died trying to follow tradition." As the second night approached, Jera stood before a small group of young warriors in the garden. She spoke softly. "I was trained to believe love is death, but now I know. Love is life." The young warriors looked uncertain, but one brave girl stepped forward. "If you can change, maybe we can too." Jera smiled. Hope was growing, but time was running out. The escape plan. The sun was low in the Salaran sky. Its orange glow painted the palace walls in deep red. The second sunset was near, and time was almost up. Jera stood on the balcony, her sharp eyes scanning the city. Guards had doubled around the palace. She could hear the humming of energy rifles and the soft buzz of surveillance drones in the air. The countdown was real. If she didn't kill Eli by tonight, they would both be executed, quietly and without trial. Jera's heart pounded, not with fear of death, but fear of losing him. Inside the chamber, Eli was sitting calmly, writing something in a notebook. It was old-fashioned, paper and pen. Something he said helped him think like a human. When she entered, he looked up. "They're going to kill us tonight," she said, no emotion in her voice, but fire in her eyes. Eli nodded. "I know. And you're not afraid." He smiled a little. "I've been afraid since I landed on this planet. I just stopped letting it control me." Jera closed the door behind her. "We need to leave. Now." For the next hour, they planned in whispers. Jera had once memorized every escape tunnel in the palace, hidden paths used by assassins, traitors, and even royal spies. But most were now sealed or watched. Only one route remained: Tunnel 17, beneath the Eastern Garden. It hadn't been used in years. The entrance was covered by thick vines and ancient stone, but it led outside the capital, into the wild forests of Solara. From there, they could try to reach an old human listening post, abandoned after the peace treaty. Eli said he could send a message to Earth from there. It was risky, but if they stayed, they would die. As night fell, Jera prepared 2 light packs, weapons, food pills, a small data cube holding everything Eli had shown her about human love, music, and life. She paused when she touched it. This little cube had changed everything. Not just her mind, but her entire purpose. She wasn't a blade anymore. She was something more. They moved quickly. Jera walked ahead, her senses sharp. Eli followed, quieter than most humans she'd seen. His military training helped. Still, he was no Salaran warrior. When they reached the Eastern Garden, they stopped. A patrol passed nearby. Jera held Eli back with a gentle hand. They waited, breath held, then moved again. Finally, they reached the old stone gate. Vines hung over it, thick and heavy. Jera used her claws to slice through the growth. Behind it was a metal door. She pressed her hand against it. The scanner blinked once, then turned green. The door hissed open. They entered the tunnel. It was dark, damp, and filled with silence. Every few steps, water dripped from the ceiling. "I don't like tunnels," Eli said. "Afraid of small spaces?" Jera asked. "No," he smiled. "Just afraid of not seeing your face." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled too. That smile lasted only a few seconds, because behind them, a sound echoed. Boots. Jera turned fast. "They're coming," she whispered. "Faster than I thought." Eli grabbed a pipe from the wall. "Guess we're not sneaking anymore." Jera took out her blade. "Then we fight." Outside the tunnel, General Morth led the attack squad. "She's heading for the outer edge," he said into his comm. "She knows about Tunnel 17. Cut them off from the other side." A soldier hesitated. "Sir, it's Jera. What if she resists?" Morth smiled. "Then we make her an example." Inside the tunnel, the fight began. Jera moved like lightning, every motion perfect. Her blade danced in the dark, glowing with blue fire. Eli fought beside her, not like a soldier, but like a survivor. Fast, clever, using the environment. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to escape. Jera knocked out one guard, then another. Eli was breathing hard. How many more? Too many. Suddenly, Jera was hit in the leg by a stun dart. She fell to one knee. Eli caught her. "We're almost there. Keep moving." She gritted her teeth, blood running down her thigh. "I can still walk." Together, limping, they reached the final gate. But it was locked. "I need 10 seconds to hack it," Eli said, opening a small panel. "Then I'll buy you 10 seconds, Jera said, stepping in front of him, blade ready again. The last group of soldiers arrived. General Morth stepped forward. "Jera," he said, voice calm. "You've gone too far. You've broken the sacred vows. You've chosen a human. This ends now." Jera raised her blade. "Yes, it does." Morth laughed. "Still protecting the weak." Eli's voice came from behind her. Weak doesn't mean useless. With a loud click, the gate opened. "Jera, now," he shouted. She turned, grabbed Eli's hand, and ran. Behind them, lasers flew. Sparks danced across the tunnel walls. But they didn't stop. They reached the surface and saw the stars again. They didn't rest. They ran into the wild forest, trees with glowing leaves, strange creatures hiding in the dark, air thick with mist. Jera's leg bled. Eli tore his shirt and wrapped it. They kept moving. No longer a warrior and a prisoner, but partners. At dawn, they reached the old listening post. It was broken, rusty, overgrown. But Eli smiled. "It's enough." He turned on the old console. Static. Then silence. Then a signal. "Earth," he said into the mic. "This is Eli Grant. I have Jera. We're alive, and we've started something that can't be stopped." Jera stood beside him, her body bruised but her heart strong. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." The trial. A storm was coming. Not in the sky, but in the hearts of the people. By now, news of Jera's betrayal had spread across the Salaran Empire like wildfire. Screens flashed with her face. The words traitor, shame, and bondbreaker followed her name. But the younger generation, they weren't so sure. For the first time, they were asking dangerous questions. What if the bonding tradition is wrong? What if Jera is right? And most dangerous of all, what if love is stronger than power? Far away in the wild forest, Jera and Eli sat near the broken listening post, watching the stars blink in the distance. Eli had sent the message to Earth. Now they waited. Jera stared at the sky. "We can't run forever." Eli nodded. "I know. We're not running anymore." She looked at him. "Then what are we doing?" "We're going back." Her head snapped toward him. "Back. To the city. That's suicide." Eli met her eyes calmly. "Not if we do it right." Jera was silent for a long time. Then she asked, "What's the plan?" Eli smiled slightly. "We give them a show." The next day, they returned to the capital. Not hiding, not sneaking, but walking straight into the public square. Thousands were gathered, watching holograms of Jera's betrayal replayed in a loop. When she appeared in the flesh, silence dropped like a hammer. Gasps, screams, weapons drawn. But no one fired, because beside her stood Eli, calm, strong, very much alive. And because Jera didn't hide. She stepped forward and raised her voice for all to hear. "I did not kill them, and I will not kill for tradition." Guards rushed forward. The crowd split like water. Jera dropped her blade to the ground. "I will stand trial," she said, "but so will your laws." They were taken to the Grand Chamber, a place older than memory, where ancient stones held the weight of thousands of judgments. Jera stood tall, still in her battle-worn armor. Eli stood beside her, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. Across from them sat the High Court of Solara, 7 robed elders, cold and silent. And above them, in her throne of stars, sat the High Queen, a figure no outsider had ever seen before. Her voice echoed across the chamber. "Jera, daughter of Raj-Tur, do you accept the charge of bond-breaking?" "I accept the trial," Jera said, "but not the guilt." Whispers filled the room. The queen continued, "And who speaks for the outsider?" Eli stepped forward. "I do. My name is Eli Grant, human and alive, because she let me live." The trial began. The prosecution was swift. Jera violated sacred tradition. She dishonored her ancestors. She exposed our race to weakness. Then it was Jera's turn. She didn't speak like a warrior. She spoke like a witness to something deeper. "I was raised to believe love must end in death. That to bond is to consume. But when I met him, I saw something else, a kind of strength I had never been taught." She turned to Eli. He trusted me with his life, and I chose to protect it. That choice was the first truly free one I've ever made. The chamber was silent. Then Eli activated the small data cube. Holograms danced into the air. Human weddings, parents holding babies, laughter, tears, poetry, music, sacrifice not for dominance, but for love. This, Eli said, is our tradition. The images showed two humans growing old together, a family, a future. Jera's people watched, wide-eyed. The queen raised her hand. These feelings, are they worth death? Eli answered, they are worth life. Then the High Queen asked a question that made everyone freeze. Jera, if you could go back, would you choose death again? Jera looked down, then slowly raised her head. No, she said, because this time, I learned to feel. The court deliberated for hours. Outside the chamber, a crowd grew. Thousands of young Talarans and curious elders. Some held signs, some held blades, but none were certain what would happen next. Finally, the chamber doors opened. Everyone held their breath. The queen stood. Jera, she said, you have broken our tradition, but you have not broken our world. Instead, you have shown us it is changing. More gasps. Eli looked at Jera. Her eyes were wide. The queen continued, you will not be executed, but neither will you walk free. Jera stepped forward. Then what is the judgment? The queen replied, you will prove your belief in the most sacred arena we have. Eli frowned. Arena. The queen's eyes narrowed. The trial of the heart. The crowd exploded in noise. Jera paled. The arena is a death sentence, she whispered. Eli asked, what is it? She turned to him. It's a ritual, a test of bond. You and I, together, against beasts, traps, enemies from the past. And if we survive, they'll accept our union, she said. They'll accept love. And if we don't? Eli asked. Jera looked him dead in the eyes. Then we die in front of the whole planet. Eli took a deep breath. Guess we better win then. The arena of death. The arena wasn't just a place. It was a monster in itself. It stood on the edge of the royal city, carved deep into the stone heart of Mount Sarnak. Its walls were black and cracked from centuries of battles. A dome of shimmering light hovered above it, locking everything inside. No one could enter. No one could leave, unless they were chosen. And today, the whole galaxy was watching. Jera stood in the preparation chamber, staring at the armor laid out in front of her. It was ceremonial, polished, cold, but it felt wrong. She had worn armor her whole life, but this time, the weight felt different. This time, she wasn't fighting as a warrior. She was fighting as a woman in love. Behind her, Eli was being fitted with light body armor by a nervous attendant. It was his first time inside a Xalaran war chamber. His armor didn't have the same elegance as Jera's, but he didn't care. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to survive, and to protect the woman who had once been sent to kill him. A voice echoed through the stone halls. Enter the ring. Jera turned to Eli. This trial is more than just a battle. The arena responds to our thoughts. It changes. It punishes fear. Eli gave a short laugh. Then let's give it something new. Hope. She almost smiled. Then they walked out together. The crowd roared. Over 100,000 aliens filled the arena stands. Elders, children, warriors, even the High Queen herself sat in the skybox, watching. Holographic cameras hovered everywhere, sending the trial across the planet. Every citizen would witness what came next. At the center of the arena, a circle of stone lit up. Jera and Eli stood inside it. Above them, a giant voice called out, "This is the trial of the heart. You face 3 challenges. Only unity will save you. The crowd fell silent, and the arena shifted. The ground cracked. The walls twisted. The first challenge had begun. Challenge 1. The Maze of Beasts. The floor opened. Jera and Eli fell down into darkness and landed in a jungle. Bright red plants grew everywhere. The air smelled sweet, too sweet. Eli whispered, "This isn't a real jungle, is it?" Jera replied, "It's alive. The arena builds illusions from our minds." Suddenly, the bushes shook. Out came a beast, 12 feet tall, black fur, 6 eyes, and 3 mouths. It was one of Jera's childhood fears, a ravager. Behind it, another, and another. 3 total. Jera reached for her blade. Eli grabbed a metal branch off a nearby tree. They stood back to back. Jera whispered, "We fight as one." The ravagers attacked. Jera moved like lightning, her blade slicing across the air. Eli ducked, rolled, struck when he could. He wasn't fast, but he was smart. He used terrain, used tricks, used his human mind. Together, they brought down one ravager, then another. The last beast roared and lunged straight at Eli. Jera screamed his name, but he didn't move. Instead, he slid under the beast and stabbed it in the belly with a jagged stone. It collapsed. The jungle faded. They stood alone again in the stone circle, panting, bruised, but alive. The crowd erupted in cheers. Challenge 2, the Wall of Truth. Without warning, walls of white light surrounded them. Jera blinked. I know this place. It was her old training hall. Suddenly, figures appeared around them, memories. Jera's father, her old commander, the voice of her sister. Each one spoke. "You are nothing without tradition. You betrayed your people. You chose weakness." Jera shook her head. "They're not real. They're just echoes." Eli was trapped too. He stood in a vision of his old commander from Earth. "You're a fool, Eli. You gave up everything for an alien who might kill you tomorrow." Eli yelled back, "She didn't kill me. She changed me." The visions pressed harder. Jera dropped to her knees. But Eli crawled to her, gripped her hand. "Look at me," he said. "We choose our truth, not theirs." Jera's eyes cleared. The illusions shattered. The walls vanished. They were back in the center of the arena. Together. Final challenge. The choice. The floor opened again. 2 pedestals rose from the ground. On one pedestal, a weapon, Jera's ceremonial blade, glowing with energy. On the other, a tiny orb pulsing with human life, Eli's DNA signal, glowing soft blue. A voice echoed, "To end the trial, one must destroy the other." The crowd went silent. Even the queen leaned forward. Jera stepped toward the blade. Eli stepped toward the orb. Neither moved. The voice repeated, "To win, one must die." Jera looked at the blade, then at Eli. Tears formed in her eyes. "I can't," she whispered. Eli placed his hand over the orb. "I won't." They turned away from the weapons. Hand in hand, they walked to the center and stood still, together, refusing to play the game. The arena flickered. The air shimmered. The entire trial stopped. A new voice echoed, this one from above. The queen had risen from her throne. "This has never happened," she said. "No victory, no death, only unity." She stood. "All of Selara, bear witness. These 2 have done what no one else could." Jera and Eli looked up. "They've proven that love is not weakness," she continued. "It is strength, and it may be the future." The arena dome dropped. The crowd rose in awe. And for the first time in Xalaran history, they cheered for love. The shaking truth. The cheers didn't stop. For the first time in Xalaran history, the crowd celebrated life over death. They didn't just cheer for Jera and Eli. They cheered for change. The dome above the arena faded. The suns broke through, golden and warm. A soft wind blew across the faces of thousands, and in that moment, the world felt new. But deep inside Jera, something else was rising. A tremble, not from fear, not from weakness, but from a feeling she had no words for, a feeling that made her shake. After the trial of the heart, Jera and Eli were taken to the Queen's Hall. This time, there were no guards with weapons drawn, no blades, no chains, only respect. The High Queen stood at the balcony, looking over the gardens below. She turned slowly as they entered. "You've broken more than tradition," she said. "You've broken silence. You've shown our people a different kind of power." Jera stepped forward. "Then give them a different kind of choice." The Queen studied her, then looked at Eli. "You risked everything to change her. Why?" Eli replied calmly, "Because I saw the truth in her eyes, even when she didn't." The Queen was silent for a moment, then nodded once. "Then the court's decision is final. From this day forward, bonding will no longer mean death. A warrior may choose to love." Jera's heart thudded once. She felt the world shift under her feet. For generations, her people had lived by the sword. Now, they could live by the heart. The news spread fast. Across cities, screens lit up with the headline, "Bonding law rewritten. Death no longer required." Young warriors celebrated in the streets. Artists painted Jera and Eli side by side on buildings. Even elders, those once loyal to the old ways, sat quietly, unsure but thoughtful. At a quiet temple in the mountains, Jera's sister saw the news. She smiled sadly and whispered, "You did what I couldn't." Back in the royal quarters, Jera sat by a quiet fountain. The water sparkled under moonlight. Eli sat beside her, watching the stars. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli nodded, but it wasn't easy. She looked at him. It was never supposed to be easy. They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "What now?" He smiled. "Now we live." The next morning, Earth sent a transport shuttle. The president of the Unified Earth Council had sent a message personally. "Eli Grant, you have changed the future of 2 worlds. You are invited to return home and share your story. With honor." Jera watched the ship land in the palace garden. Its lights were soft, its engines quiet, but something inside her felt loud, like a war between past and present. She looked at Eli. "You're going back." He nodded. "They need to hear this. They need to know peace is real." She looked away, heart aching. "And me?" Eli stepped closer. "You are free to choose." Later that night, they stood by the ship. Jera touched his face gently. "You came here as a sacrifice," she said, "and you left as something else." "A partner," Eli replied. "Maybe more." She smiled softly. "Will I see you again?" Eli's hand slipped something into hers, a small silver ring. Simple, human. "I don't want to leave without a promise." She opened her palm. The ring caught the starlight. "I promise," she whispered. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But their eyes spoke more than words. Weeks passed. Jera stayed in Xalara. She became more than a warrior. She became a voice. She visited young training camps, told them about Earth, about love, about choice. Some hated her, but most listened. Some even wept. One day, she stood before a large group of cadets. She held up her old blade and said, "This made me strong. But this," she pointed to her heart, "made me real." On Earth, Eli became a global hero. He gave speeches, wrote a book, told people how one whisper changed a planet. Still, he kept a photo in his pocket. A photo of her. He looked at it every night before sleeping. And every morning when he woke up. One evening, under a deep red sunset, Jera sat alone on the mountain cliffs of her home world. Suddenly, the air shimmered behind her. She turned fast, hand on her new blade. Then froze. It was him. Eli stood there, a little older, a little more human, but just as calm as ever. Jera's breath caught. "You came back," she said. "I kept my promise," he replied. She stepped forward, her hands shaking. This time, she didn't stop. She pulled him close and kissed him. The sky above them lit up with shooting stars. Years later, people across both worlds told their story. The Salaran who chose not to kill. The human who chose not to run. The bond that changed two civilizations forever. And the whisper that made her shake. Not from fear, but from love.